Good evening, everybody. I think I know everybody, but in case I don't, my name is Elisa Kaplan. I'm president of the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County, and I bring you greetings from the society. The Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County is a home for Jewish memories, and we tell the Jewish story in Fairfield County and beyond. I'd just like to have a few notes about Zoom. We are recording, and if you want to see this program again or refer it to someone else, it'll be on the Jewish Historical Society website. And for you, only $2.99. Just kidding. Okay. Please, a suggestion, if you like, you could choose speaker view instead of gallery view to get a good view of anyone who's speaking. And a very special thank you to our Vice President for Education and Programming, Marcy Schoenfeld, the hostess with the mostest. If we were in person, Marcy would be showering you with Hershey's Kisses and lots of cookies and hot stuff to drink. So Marcy produced this program for tonight. So thank you so much, Marcy. Tonight, our presentation is very timely and particularly appropriate because Hanukkah starts in minutes from now. And I can tell you that I am not ready, but in 24 hours I will be. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to find your menorah or Chanukiah and clean out all the old wax. Then you have to find candles. And you might also, want a copy of Hanukkah blessings or a Hanukkah meditation or some Hanukkah songs to go along with it. The menorah or the lamp has a mission as well. It provides light at the winter solstice, and this year we're near enough to December 21st. And at one of the darkest periods of our history with the pandemic raging. So please be safe and stay strong. So the menorah could not take center stage at a better time. So we need you, menorah. Light yourself up. And we have a great light with us tonight. We are delighted to welcome Jonathan Fass. He's the Managing Director of Educational Technology and Strategy at the Jewish Education Project of New York. And I know this group, not the individuals who are there now, but the people behind it and some of the work they've done in the past, and they are cutting edge, and there's going to be a lot of exciting things. So Jonathan, will be looking to you to highlight what's going on there and show us what's the latest and greatest in Jewish education, which is latest and greatest for education in general. So until very recently, Jonathan was the Chief Operating Officer of the Elaine and James Shoki Jewish Family Services of Fairfield County. But Jonathan is well known for other things in the Stanford area. He's including years ago, Managing Director of Jewish Living and Learning at the JCC, then a quick trip of about 8 years or so to Israel with Jonathan and his family. He worked with the Kuryansky Teen Tzedakah Corps. He managed and directed and led the Barron Institute for Leadership. And currently, as most of us who are here tonight, he's leading the JCC's Taste of Torah. So some of us, many of us here tonight, get to see Jonathan once a week and be challenged by his questions and by each other. Jonathan is no slouch. He holds a master's degree from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and he was a fellow both in the Senior Educators Program of the Melton Center for Jewish Education at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the Jim Joseph Foundation Fellowship of the Lockstein Center for Jewish Education at Bar Ilan University. Did you notice how many names of people were in all the things Jonathan has done? Wow. So he's really connected to some important people and lots of good funding. I hope that works out well for you in the future, Jonathan. So, Jonathan, light the menorah for us and take it away.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. I really appreciate the warm welcome and all of the introductory comments. I recorded it. I'm sending it to my mother. It'll be the best Hanukkah she's ever had. I'm really delighted to join you again, and thank you, Marcy, also for extending an invitation to me on behalf of the Jewish Historical Society. One of the things that, and in this, in no way to be critical, one of the things that Alyssa did not share is that I also write book reviews for the Jewish Book Council in New York. And in 2006, I was asked to write a book review for this book here called The Menorah, From the Bible to Modern Israel. When I shared that with Marcy and Alyssa at a meeting of the Jewish Historical Society a few months ago, they said, well, why don't you do a book talk about it? And so that's what I'm here to do. What I'm going to do is share my screen in a minute or so, and I'm going to walk you through the highlights, a little bit about the author and some of the highlights of this book, in the hopes that it'll both give you a greater understanding of the history of the menorah, but also encourage you to consider picking up this book and maybe reading it. It is, I thoroughly enjoyed reviewing it. It is a wonderful way to explore Jewish life and history through cultural arts, through a cultural dimension, and through an arts dimension, which I think is a wonderful way to another and wonderful way to explore Judaism. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Great, terrific. Okay. So the book that we're talking about today is Dr. Stephen Fine's The Menorah, From the Bible to Modern Israel. Just a little bit about the book itself, published by Harvard University Press in 2016, 304 pages. Don't let that dissuade you from reading it. The last 30 pages or so are footnotes. If that dissuades you from reading it, oh, I don't want to read a book with a lot of footnotes. Let me tell you, you don't need the footnotes. It's really not it's an excellent presentation of the topic. It's not overly scholarly. It's a very readable and accessible book. And as I said, I reviewed it for the Jewish Book Council in December 2016. And if you go to the Jewish Book Council website, www.jewishbookcouncil.org, put in my last name in a search, you can search for the review itself. But you're actually going to get today a larger, deeper, and richer presentation about this book than just the 500 words the Jewish Book Council gave me for the review. Okay? All right, a little bit about Stephen Fine. So Dr. Fine is a cultural historian specializing in Jewish history in the Greco-Roman period. His work focuses on the literature of ancient Judaism, art, and archaeology, and the way that modern scholars have interpreted Jewish antiquity. And indeed, that's what his book is all about. He walks you through the history of the menorah, both as a symbol and as a symbol for the Jewish people, but also a symbol that has been used throughout Jewish history. Dr. Fine is a professor at Yeshiva University, and he's the director of the Arch of Titus project at Yeshiva University, Center for Israel Studies, and the founding editor of Images, a journal of Jewish art and visual culture. Now, what is the Arch of Titus project? How many of you, by show of hands, have been to the Arch of Titus? Okay, good, terrific. So if you are unfamiliar, in the archaeological remains of ancient Rome, there is a ceremonial arch that was erected to commemorate the victory of the Roman general and Emperor Titus in his victory in the Jewish War of 66 to 74 CE. This is an important war. This was in 70 CE, some say 73 CE. The temple was destroyed by the Romans. This memorial arch, this commemorative arch, includes on one of its inside facades a very, very famous relief. A relief of the Romans triumphantly processing while the Israelites are carrying the menorah, which presumably was stolen from the temple, with Jerusalemites or Israelites also walking with these, as slaves now in this Roman procession. What the Arch of Titus project is specifically is an attempt to sort of reconstruct what the Arch of Titus might have looked like at the time it was built. Today, when you see it, it is without color. It is worn, over the ravages of time. But one of the things that Dr. Fine discovered is that all of the reliefs of the Arch of Titus were originally painted. And for those of you who have ever, have anyone here ever been to the pyramids in Egypt? So if you've been to the pyramids of Egypt and if you've been inside the pyramids of Egypt, one of the things that was fascinating to me when I went for the first time was that the hieroglyphic interiors, paintings, descriptions inside the pyramids were originally color. They were in color. And indeed, when Dr. Fine, began his research, he realized that this relief, as well as other reliefs on the Arch of Titus, were originally colored. And he reviews what that is and does a historical history of the Arch of Titus. This is from the introduction to the book, from the preface, where he explains his interest in this topic. This historical reflection on the menorah has everything to do with my own biography and the ways that my interests have developed over an increasingly lengthy career. It is rooted in my childhood love of the festival of Hanukkah, with its ever-increasing yet flickering flames. I remember fondly my mother's shining chrome menorah with multicolored candles imported from Israel, their box gaudily decorated with an image of the Arch of Titus, like menorah, that I now know was designed by the great Zionist artist Ze'ev Rabban. It begins with the glow I felt as a 9-year-old American boy after the tears my mother shed in May 1967 as the prospect of yet another Jewish catastrophe turned to joy and laughter in 6 days at the start of June. This crisis was the beginning of my love affair with the 7-branched menorah, the symbol of the state of Israel, and thus my cognizance of the Arch of Titus menorah. Okay, so what you see here in the image on the right here, in the image on the left, is a piece of that interior relief of the Arch of Titus with the menorah of presumably the menorah of the temple. And obviously what you see here is something that we call a menorah today, but actually the better term for it would be a Chanukiah. A Chanukiah is, as you can see, it's not 7-branched, right? It's 9-branched. The eight of the branches represent, of course, the 8 days of Hanukkah. The center branch, in this case, it doesn't always have to be the center, is the shamash. And that shamash is the helper candle, of course, as we all know, that lights the other candles. What's important to realize is, what I just want to emphasize is that the menorah of the temple, and that symbol is the symbol that Dr. Fine is tracing the history of, not the history of the Chanukiah. He draws a connection between the two, and there is a strong connection that he draws out, and which I will emphasize during our talk. But when I talk about the menorah, I'm talking about the one on the left. He's talking about the one on the left, not the one on the right. Fair? Any questions so far? Go ahead, Gail. You're muted, Gail.
Was trying to use the space bar. If you notice the logo for the Jewish Historical Society is the seven-armed, and why we chose the seven-armed, our artist, our graphic artist who designed it, wanted to have something that was very, very old that represented the Jews, but it's modern, it's done in a modern view.
Oh.
So it's so related to what you're talking about.
Absolutely, and as we go through Dr. Fine's book now, you'll see other examples of that. And what Dr. Fine is doing is he's tracing the history of the menorah as an icon and a symbol for the Jewish people, beginning all the way back in the biblical period and moving into modern day. And that's where we're going to start our quest. Are we ready? Terrific. All right, here we go. Oh, I should probably clear that away. Okay, there we go. Okay, so Dr. Fine begins his exploration by bringing us to the Arch of Titus and his work on the Arch of Titus project. There we see a better picture of the Arch of Titus. And we see it, the whole arch, and then we see up at the top on the right, the relief on the inside and the menorah. And if you can see, and I realize it's hard to see, but if you can see on that actual picture of the menorah, he numbered and circled certain areas. Can you see that? It's a little tough. Those are the areas where Dr. Fine found color on the actual relief. A yellowish color, to be expected, symbolizing the gold of the menorah itself. Dr. Fine starts our conversation by saying this about the importance of the menorah as a Jewish symbol. The Arch of Titus menorah is the starting point and focal point of this study. The Arch of Titus menorah provides a leitmotif for the entire study, beginning with the origins of the menorah in the biblical world, to the life of the menorah between the terrible destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE and the dawn of the modern world, and continuing from there to the modern biography of this symbol, shaped by the choice of the Arch of Titus menorah as the symbol of the state of Israel in 1949. The arch menorah is poised between the ancient and the medieval, the modern and whatever comes next. With Shelley, we can indeed say that the menorah is in between dream and memory. And so I think, Gail, you were suggesting that the Jewish Historical Society's menorah is the same, right? It bridges the old and the new in a very interesting way. Okay. This is how Dr. Fine sort of breaks down his book. It's a pretty easy and accessible read. He has this introduction, which I read to you a little bit from. I just read to you a little bit from the first chapter, and then he divides his book into 7 chapters, each chapter taking on a different piece in the history of the menorah as a symbol of the Jewish people. So we have from Titus to Moses and back, that first chapter, which is about the biblical period, Flavian Rome to the 19th century. I realize that's a very long stretch of history, but that is basically from the destruction of the temple until, as suggested, the 19th century. Modernity, Zionism, and the menorah is about really into the 19th century and then 20th century. Creating a national symbol is about the history of the menorah becoming a symbol for the state of Israel. A Jewish Holy Grail is a departure a little bit from the historical, not a departure from the historical, but a departure from a timeline view of this study, and explores the ways that people have sort of considered the menorah like the Holy Grail or the Shroud of Turin, an object to be discovered, hidden someplace and yet unfound. The menorah at the Vatican is an exploration of what I'm going to call, and what he kind of calls, but not in Yiddish, a Baba Misa, which is that the menorah actually was taken by the Romans, in the destruction and made its way to the Vatican. And is there any truth in that Baba Misa? Clearly, if I'm calling it a Baba Misa, there is no truth in it. And And then he explores in chapter 7 ways that the menorah has been reinterpreted and reused post its establishment as the symbol of the state of Israel. And then in his conclusion, he kind of brings it all together. Okay? From chapter 1, from Titus to Moses and back. In this chapter, okay, what Dr. Fine concludes is that the symbol of the menorah, which is of course connected to the centrality of the temple, it was a symbol as well for the temple, is burned indelibly in the minds of the Jewish people because of its significance in the temple period, because of its references to it and its construction and how it is built in the Bible, how it is further discussed in Mishnah and Gemara, the Talmud, how it's further discussed in rabbinic writings and later rabbinic writings like Maimonides and other writers, that the symbol of the menorah is as important, if not more recognizable in Jewish life as the Mogen David, as the Star of David. And Dr. Fine writes, to conclude, from the Bible to the Arch of Titus, the menorah is among the best known artifacts of Jewish antiquity, a fact that in no way instills confidence that we know much about it. And that's an important point, Dr. Fine says. Even though it is recognized as a central feature, symbol of the Jewish people, we really have no clear understanding of what it really looked like, how large was it really, how was it, what it was really constructed from. All of our writings about it, both biblical and post-biblical, are only really best guess estimations of what it might actually have wound up being. It is a written history in texts and in artifacts with many, many holes in our knowledge along the way. We need not choose one menorah as the original or most significant menorah with the original base over others. Numerous menorahs were used in the service of the Second Temple over its long history. One of these, perhaps the most ornate of all, was reproduced on the Arch of Titus and displayed as booty in Vespasian's Temple of Peace for the glory of Vespasian, Titus, and above all, Rome. And I'll just add there something that may have not been known to you. As that menorah made its way into Rome and was depicted as being carried into Rome on the Arch of Titus, it didn't stop there. It actually went into Vespasian's Temple of Peace as sort of a symbol of the power of Vespasian and Titus in Rome, but also sort of to mock the Jewish people who had this magnificent temple, but it was leveled by Rome, by the power of Rome. Okay? Questions, thoughts? So far, so good? Interesting? Good. Okay. Terrific. All right. Chapter 2. From Flavian Rome to the 19th century. In this chapter, right, from the construction of the Arch of Titus to the close of the 19th century, the menorah had a prominent place in Jewish iconography and thought, as it did for Samaritans, Christians, and on occasion Muslims. The potent symbol took numerous forms, yet was astonishingly consistent in form, even as the ways that it was fabricated and interpreted changed and served each of the many communities and places that sought out its light. As the 20th century approached, however, this lampstand of biblical antiquity was ascribed with new significance among Jews. It became both a symbol for Jewish emancipation, literally enlightenment, liberalizing Judaism, and Jewish nationalism, usually but not always Zionism, and sometimes all of these at the same time. And I put some interesting pictures up here just to bring home Dr. Fine's point. The picture on the top is a mosaic from a Samaritan synagogue in Israel. For those of you who are not aware, there was a break within Jewish peoplehood around the time of the start of the Rabbinic Age, and a group of people called the Samaritans broke off and maintained what they would call a Jewish practice that was purer to the intention of the written texts, and did not accept any of the rabbinic literature. They had synagogues of their own, and you can see in this image, which is of the Mosaic floor of this synagogue, how the menorah, how the menorah features prominently. Yes, everyone see that? You can also see in this image, I hope it's large enough for you, you can also see the entrance to the Holy of Holies, as well as the table of shewbread that would have been for the offerings. Okay? So this is one way in which the Samaritans, a sect of Judaism, a branch of Judaism, incorporated the menorah into their iconography. Here, you might think this is a Jewish coin. It's actually not a Jewish coin. It's a coin from the Umayyad dynasty, which was a Muslim dynasty that controlled Jerusalem prior to the Crusades. And you can see that they utilized the menorah as a symbol on their own coin. However, interestingly enough, around that menorah in Arabic, it is hard to read, but I'm taking Dr. Fine's word for it. Okay, written in Arabic is Arabic for praising Allah. So this is a coin of the Muslim world that the Muslim world in power in Jerusalem that used the menorah as a symbol of the fact that this coin was coming from Jerusalem, the home of the temple, the home of the menorah. And then this image here, the menorah with the statue of the woman, is inside a church. And this is a fascinating piece of statuary. Here you see the menorah as it might have appeared in the temple. You see a female figure looks as if she's lighting the menorah. And you see here on the ground what looks like a broken column. I'm gonna pause for a second and ask if anyone would like to try to interpret what that means. And I'm gonna pause the share. What might that mean? Raise your hand if you have some thoughts on this. Can you unspotlight me or unpin me so we can see everybody? Great, terrific. Yeah, go ahead. Mr. Ginsburg.
Yeah, Larry. Thank you, John.
Yeah, Larry.
I think it has something to do with supersessionalism. The church taking over the covenant of the Jews. And since I know Stephen Fine, he and I had that discussion many years ago. But
so you cheated, is what you're saying. What you're saying is you cheated.
Yeah, a little. But I had known that beforehand. If you look at Abba Eben's History of Israel, he shows pictures of how the church is a beautiful woman with all the accoutrements of the Jewish religion, and how the synagogue is cast down and broken and has the broken column next to her.
Correct. So you're right on target, Larry. And indeed, the woman is the church. The column is broken Judaism. And the woman lighting the menorah is the woman, or Christianity, rekindling Jewish life in the way, or Judaism, or their faith, as a redoing, a relighting of Judaism, but not in pure Judaism, in church's Judaism, in Christianity's Judaism. So these are three examples that Dr. Fine brings to show how the menorah has been used across from the, let's say, first century to 19th century by a variety of different groups in very, very different ways. Sandy.
Just a question, Jonathan, because if you take a look at the Quran, The Quran accepts the Old Testament and the New Testament, and from what I gather, they say that Judaism was an imperfect form of religion, Christianity a little less imperfect, with Islam being the most perfect. Do we find in Muslim holy places today any symbols, including a menorah?
No, we find no symbols in any Muslim holy places because by practice and creed, Islam does not allow any representations in their holy spaces.
Thank you.
So there are no, that's why they are often beautifully adorned with writing, but not beautifully adorned with any images whatsoever. They don't allow any graven images. All right, I'm gonna go over to chapter 3. Fair? Okay, here we go. Get myself back here. In chapter 3, Dr. Fine talks about the menorah as becoming a symbol of a modern symbol used as we looked at in a previous paragraph, used by liberal Judaism or in modern interpretations of Judaism, used in Zionism, not yet specifically as a symbol for the state of Israel, but used as a symbol of Zionism and Jewish pride. When the state of Israel was proclaimed in May 1948, the menorah, particularly the Arch of Titus menorah, was a broadly held symbol within the Jewish body politic in Palestine and internationally. Jewish religious and even anti-religious moderns, especially Zionists, and even American reformers like Magnin, saw the arch menorah as the central Jewish symbol. It was a lamp to be lit not just at Hanukkah, but in Reformed temples and even modernizing Orthodox synagogues from Eastern Europe to Los Angeles. It was kindled in Zionist ceremony, used in the ceremonies of other Jewish fraternal societies, and displayed on the water towers of Jewish Palestine and adorned on the caps of the Jewish Legion. And in the images you see here, you see a few things. The lower image is actually a mosaic, a painting on the wall of Wilshire Boulevard Temple. Wilshire Boulevard Temple is a very large Reform synagogue in Los Angeles. This was intentionally painted by Magnin. Magnin was the rabbi at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, I believe the founding rabbi at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. And it is a reinterpretation of the Arch of Titus. This time, the people carrying the menorah out of, the Roman is the centurion is still there, but the people carrying the menorah are no longer Romans, they are Jews. And the symbolism here is that the Jews are carrying the menorah, or Jewish, one potential interpretation is that the Jews are carrying the menorah to a new place for Judaism. And that, of course, is the New World. That, of course, is liberal Judaism. That is an interesting reinterpretation of the original intent of the image. The image on the top right is actually, I want to pay attention to, is the pin. This is a menorah, as you can see. It is a pin. It is a pin that was worn in the hats of the Jewish Legion of the British service. That was part of the Jewish Brigade of the United Kingdom's armies that served in Palestine, but also served elsewhere. And their symbol was the menorah, obviously adopted as a symbol of Jewish pride. And another symbol of Jewish pride you can see in the image on the left. This is Vladimir Jabotinsky, or Zev Jabotinsky, the leader of the revisionist movement of the figurehead of the revisionist movement of Zionism, standing in front of the Western Wall. In one hand is a sword. There's a militant sense to revisionist Zionism. And of course, in the other hand, what is he holding? But the menorah, a symbol of power. So the menorah becomes reinterpreted, not as a symbol. I chose these images specifically because in each of these reinterpretations of the menorah, it is no longer a symbol of the power of Rome. It is now a symbol of the power of the Jewish people. It is a reinterpreted symbol. I liken it in a way to the fact that, for example, in Black churches, Many initial Negro spirituals, I'm calling them Negro intentionally, that's what they were called at the time, were reclaimed by the Black Christian community to become church songs, songs of elevation. It was a reinterpretation, recasting of something which had once been a statement of slavery into a statement of pride and power and faith and hope. Does that make sense?
Interesting interpretation.
Okay. All right.
Nice comparison.
I'll just pause the share for a second. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Anything? No? Okay. So the state of Israel, as we know, is founded in May 1948, and they are seeking a symbol for the state of Israel. This is separate and distinct from the flag of the state of Israel, right? The flag of the state of Israel, we know historically, is meant to resemble a talus, right? It's white with blue stripes on top and bottom, and a Magen David in the Star of David in the middle. It's meant to symbolize a talus. The symbol of the state of Israel is this. Everyone see it? See the images? Okay. The choice of the menorah as a symbol of the state of Israel was determined in the original charge of the Committee on the State Symbol that met in 1948. The process by which the Israeli emblem, called explicitly in Hebrew by the loaded term semel, a symbol, was formed is an engaging one, reflecting the broad complexities of creating a shared new national culture for a new nation state. I'd like to share some of the images that Dr. Fine shares in this chapter. So the image in the lower image here is, of course, the symbol of the state of Israel. If you're not familiar, which I assume we all are, it is the menorah of the temple, right? Taken directly from what we might imagine it would have looked like on the Arch of Titus if that hadn't been worn away a little bit, right? And then surrounded by two olive branches, symbols of peace, and then of course the name Yisrael, Israel, on the bottom. Okay, what is the interpretation here? Right? Again, it's understood to be a reinterpretation. The last time that there was power in the state and strength in Israel was during the period of the Hasmoneans, going back, or the Maccabees, going back to the story of Hanukkah. That was the last time there was a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel before the modern period. That sovereign Jewish state, the menorah existed, the temple existed. Then, of course, the Greeks would take over, and then ultimately the Romans would take over, and then ultimately the Romans would destroy the temple and carry out the menorah. By using the menorah here, it is a reclaiming of the fact that Israel is now once again a sovereign state, just as it was way back when last time in the Hasmonean period. Is that clear? The images on the top and on the right are very, very fascinating to me. The image on the top is actually a picture of a Rosh Hashanah postcard. That postcard has a few images that I'm going to try to point out to you, and I realize that it's small. Over here is a picture of Moses. Actually, it's not a picture of Moses, it's a reproduction of David's Moses. Over here, it says Lashana Tova Tikatevu, and then it has the year and the month of Tishrei. Over here, it has a procession of Israeli soldiers. Behind them is the state of Israel. There is the Arch of Titus. And right here is the menorah with a relief, a picture of the inside relief of that menorah being taken to Rome. And over here is what gives away where this was actually used. This is a Rosh Hashanah card distributed in the Terezin displaced persons camp
Oh, wow.
after the war.
Wow.
This is a symbol of Jewish in 1949. So the state of Israel is already founded, and these displaced persons, these Jews in this displaced persons camp, are using all of these images of Jewish power, the soldiers, the state. Israel has already been established, right? Moses, the menorah, as a symbol of, you might actually say, the reversal of what happened in Rome, right? The soldiers seem to be walking their way almost out of the Arch of Titus, walking the menorah back, in a sense. And it's a very, very powerful image. And then the image on the right is a statue called Scroll of Fire by the sculptor Natan Rappaport, a sculpture created in 1971. Here you see the menorah again. Now the menorah is not being carried by slaves, Roman captive, Israelite captives. Instead, it's being carried by soldiers and civilians of the Jewish people. So again, it is a reinterpretation of the menorah from a statement of the power of Rome to a statement of the power of Jews and the land of Israel. Okay. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Yes, go ahead, Sandy. Sandy, you're muted.
In the postcard, under the statue of Moses, there seems to be one Hebrew word, unless I'm just not seeing it correctly. Is it a Hebrew word, and what does it say?
Yeah, it says it says, "Let us go up to Israel." Alatenu l'Israel. Should we go up to Israel?
Yeah.
Is what it's saying.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, of course. Anything else? Okay. Next, Dr. Fine takes us on a little bit of what I would call a fun adventure. He talks a little bit, as we discussed in these next two chapters, 5 and 6, about the menorah as sort of the holy grail of the Jewish people, right? How many of you ever saw Monty Python, the Monty Python movie, The Holy Grail, right? They go searching for the Holy Grail, or if you've seen, for example, the movie National Treasure, or if you've seen the movie The Da Vinci Code, right? Or any of the subsequent Da Vinci Code movies, right? Any of that, Dan Brown movies, right? The search for the relic of faith for Christianity, right? Or the relic, or the history of the Declaration of Independence. In this case, the menorah has actually had a similar history. Over the last century or so, no single artifact has fascinated Jews more than the menorah. While Christians often focus on the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, or the Shroud of Turin, the menorah, the preeminent symbol of Judaism turned symbol of the old, new Jewish modernity, enlightenment, and ultimately the Jewish state, continues to inspire the imagination and the desire for physical contact with biblical reality. I think that's a really important line. Why do people search for the Holy Grail? To have a sense of contact with Jesus, right? Why do people search for the menorah? Because in a search and discovery of the menorah, you prove the historicity of the Bible. You prove the historicity of the temple, the Jewish experience. It makes real something that feels a little distant. The picture on the right is Charles Warren. He's dressed up here as a soldier, but Charles Warren wasn't just a soldier. He was an archaeologist. And he is responsible for doing some of the initial excavations during the British Mandate of Palestine underneath the Temple Mount. How many of you have ever been to Hezekiah's Tunnel? Or heard of Hezekiah's Tunnel? The tunnel that Hezekiah had hewn out of the city of Jerusalem to draw water into the city of Jerusalem when Jerusalem was under siege. Charles Warren, the archaeologist, discovered that tunnel and other associated structures with the Temple Mount. The reason why I bring this picture here is because in some of Charles Warren's writing, he writes that what he was really looking for when he was excavating the Temple Mount was the artifacts of the temple service, including potentially the menorah. And in chapter 6, Dr. Fine explores the idea, the Baba that perhaps the menorah is at the Vatican. And after a thorough investigation, he ends with this chapter, this paragraph. The menorah at the Vatican is an urban legend, often believed by people of goodwill who really want the menorah to exist. For them, the menorah is a symbol of the Jewish people, all the more so once the Arch of Titus menorah was chosen as the symbol of Israel. The decision opened a new pathway, making the arch menorah all the more present on government buildings, passports, official documents, and all sorts of textbooks and posters, right? The menorah gets used, particularly after the establishment of the State of Israel, gets used and used and reused and reused. And people say, where's the real thing? And you naturally assume, well, if it was taken by the Romans, maybe today it sits in the Vatican. In 1949, placement of the state symbol above the door of the Israeli embassy in Rome was taken by some to be a kind of triumph. As long as the menorah exists, some tie with eternity is maintained. And chapter 7, which is the final historical chapter, history-based chapter, once again turns the symbol of the menorah on its head in, I think, a very, very interesting way. So we've seen the menorah used as a symbol of Roman power. We've seen the menorah adopted by other communities like the Samaritan community or the Muslim community or the Christian community. We've seen the menorah utilized as a statement of Jewish pride in the pre-modern, pre-Israel period, and we've seen it used by the State of Israel, obviously as a symbol of the State of Israel, but also used in art after the establishment of the state to show a symbol of Jewish pride. In the two images which I have here, and in this chapter, Dr. Fine suggests a new understanding of the menorah, one that is not so how can I say it? Not so kind, not so positive. Can everyone see? For now, however, I point out the sophistication with which the Israeli religious right has transformed the Zionist menorah. No longer a metaphor to be returned, the arch menorah is now a cipher for the Messianic community and its practical steps towards the settlement of the land and the rebuilding of the temple. Steps that are supported financially by Israel's current rightist government. For the Israeli Messianic right, the menorah is a symbol that reaches from Roman and Christian exile to Zionist return, to leftist Israeli betrayal, and for the most extreme, onward towards apocalyptic fulfillment. Let me explain the two images here. The image on the left is a symbol. Do you remember the Gaza Disengagement? This is an image, a photo taken in 2005, August 29th, 2005, when residents of Netzarim, one of the religious communities in Gaza, took the menorah off their synagogue as they were, I'm going to use the word, forcibly evicted from Gaza, right? From their homes, from their community, and resettled in the land of Israel. I'm not making a political point. I actually, now I will make a political point. I supported that move, but I'm just suggesting that how they felt was that they were being evicted. And this is the menorah that they had. It's not a Chanukiah, it's a menorah. And who's carrying it? They very intentionally carried it in a way that makes them look like they are the Jewish survivors of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. That is not by accident. That is intentional. And in this image on the right, you see the relief of the Arch of Titus, underneath that, you have the word Echa. Echa is a resonance for the Book of Lamentations, which teaches about the destruction of the first temple. And then the Hebrew text underneath it basically says Jews should not be evicting Jews from the Holy Land. So here, the menorah is once again being used as a resonant to resonate for the Jewish community, particularly in opposition to the liberal Jewish community, and in support of the religious Zionist community, the right-wing religious Zionist community, that sees the disengagement from Gaza, the eviction from Gaza, as being a second korban, a second or third destruction of Jewish peoplehood and of the temple. Yes, Larry.
The interesting point of Nitzarim and another Israeli town, Kefar Darom, was these were Jewish settlements that were taken by the Egyptian army in 1948. So not only is this would be the actual second expulsion of the Jews from those areas. These were lands owned by the Jewish National Fund. Technically, they're still owned by the Jewish National Fund, but they were still evacuated when Gaza was evacuated.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. I didn't want to overwhelm us with the history there, but you are 100% correct. It was a second evacuation. They had been evacuated before that with Egypt's conquering. Yes. Okay. And then Dr. Fine brings his conclusion, and in his conclusion, he opens up a little bit of a personal story about taking his son to see the Arch of Titus and exploring and looking at the history with him, just as he remembers in our earlier text about his, how he came to love the menorah as a symbol because of his mother in 1967. But he includes an image which I think is very, very, very beautiful. This is an image by the artist Mark Podwall. Here you can see the Arch of Titus menorah, but coming out of the Arch of Titus menorah, out of each of the 7 branches is what? One of the 7 species, one of the agricultural products of the land of Israel. So and if you take a look at the name of this piece of art, by the way, it's a small piece, but meaning it itself is not particularly large. It's a small piece. It's called A Song 1948, Those Who Plant in Tears Will Harvest in Joy, right? Those who plant in tears for the destruction, as symbolized by menorah, will harvest in joy the rebirth and rebuilding of the land of Israel through the 7 species. And it's through this, it's through these images sharing this history that that Dr. Fine takes us through a journey about the symbol of the menorah from the Bible to modern Israel. I really recommend the book. It is a very easy and accessible read. As you saw, it has lots of pictures in it, lots of wonderful illustrations. It's very, very interesting, particularly because it's a symbol we all know. It doesn't require a lot of heavy interpretation to appreciate what he's saying. You don't need to be an art scholar, and you just need to be a lover of Jewish history, and you find, how it has impacted and affected Jewish history for millennia, literally. So with that, I thank you very much, and I want to wish you a happy Hanukkah.
Well, Jonathan, thank you. But before we fully thank you, can you make the connection for us between the menorah and the Chanukiah?
Sure. So according to the Book of Maccabees and as well according to rabbinic texts, when the temple was reclaimed by the Maccabees and by the Hasmoneans from the Greeks, One of the seminal moments in that experience was the rekindling of the light with pure olive oil that had burned historically in the temple. That we all know the story. They only found enough oil for one day. It burned for 8 days. Hence, a 8-branched candelabra as opposed to the original 7-branched candelabra. Right? What's important probably to understand, if you really want to understand the history of Hanukkah, is that Hanukkah is probably a replacement for Sukkot. That the holiday of Sukkot was the holiday of the Jewish people, which, because the Greeks had taken over and desecrated the temple, could not be celebrated in the temple, could not be celebrated, let's just say it that way. And so when the Hasmoneans were able to reclaim the temple, they could reinstitute temple practice. Now, the problem is you can't reinstitute the practice of Sukkot not on Sukkot, because according to the Torah, the Sukkot has to begin on the 15th of Tishrei. So they created a parallel practice that mimicked the holiday of Sukkot, resonated with the holiday of Sukkot, was important in a time of darkness, and was connected to 8 days. That's one interpretation of the history of the birth of the Hanukkah. It's not a full picture of it, but hopefully it provides a little insight.
Wow. Okay. Other comments or questions?
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer it. Do you know when the Victory Arch first came into existence? And who was it? The Greeks? Was it the Romans?
The Arch of Titus?
No, just in general. I mean, the idea of it, the triumphant arch that we
No,
had.
I do not know if that precedes the Greco-Roman period or that began in the Greco-Roman period.
Okay.
I don't know. I believe
I was just curious.
I believe there's some Assyrian arches, but Larry, you might know more than I do on that.
Well, basically, the arch form was really, it was either Assyrian or Babylonian.
Yeah. But
Okay.
I don't know the date. I don't know the date itself.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Anything else?
Yeah.
Yes, Moira?
Moira.
Moira.
So in the excavations in Israel of the archaeological sites, are remnants of menorahs found? I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to this, but it's never occurred to me that they are or they aren't. Are there, have they been excavated, actual menorahs?
No, not as we would recognize them today. We see the menorah as a symbol many places in the land of Israel, as a relief, as in a mosaic, in a carving, that we see. We don't see a menorah like you would have seen in the temple, because that menorah could only have been in the temple. And we don't see Chanukiot or Hanukkah menorahs because it's interesting why we don't. The practice of instituting lighting a menorah in that way is post-rabbinic. And that would be a whole other discussion about how the rabbis interpreted what lighting of a menorah would be like versus what it is today. Because originally you might have only lit one light each night of Hanukkah, as opposed to 8 lights, or a device with 8 lights. It's a larger conversation, but the short answer is no.
I think, Liz?
Has there ever been any Israeli coins that had a menorah on its facade?
In the biblical, in the archaeological tradition, yes.
No, the modern.
Oh, modern? I'd have to look at my my wallet right now to check.
Okay.
Probably yes, but I don't know that off the top of my head. I'd have to look at my coins, my Israeli coins. But in the
But in
biblical period,
biblical-
absolutely. Absolutely. The Hasmoneans had coins with menorahs on them, absolutely. And the temple on them, yes. Other questions? Liz, I think you had a question.
No, it's just I was going to point out that in some of the digs that I saw last summer, there was were menorahs in the reliefs.
In the reliefs, right.
You got to that point after.
Right. You'll see them sometimes on ossuaries. Ossuaries are stone boxes for bones of somebody who has died, obviously. The way that burial occurred in the biblical tradition, in the ancient Israelite tradition, is first you left the body out, the body decomposed, then you collected the bones and you put the bones in an ossuary. Sometimes, in order to identify that ossuary as the bones of a Jewish person, there might have been a menorah relief on those ossuaries. And then there are other examples. That's one example.
Okay. Wow. So we have learned an awful lot about the history of the menorah and all the different periods of history and how it's gone back and forth in its interpretation and its symbolism. And Jonathan, you have, taken us up and down each arm of the menorah to look at all the different pieces of it. And I don't think we'll view the menorah the same way after hearing about this book. So an excellent, excellent lecture, and we really appreciate knowing about this book and hearing your interpretation of it. So thank you so much. Excellent.
My pleasure, and happy Hanukkah to everybody.
Happy Hanukkah.
Hanukkah Sameach.
Hanukkah.
Sameach to everybody.
Take care.